As the year 1975 began, the Vietnam War entered a decisive phase of transformation. Following the defeat at Phuoc Long, and more critically, the strategic breakthrough in the Central Highlands, the defensive posture of the Republic of Vietnam began to fracture in a cascading chain reaction. No longer were these isolated losses. The defensive system of South Vietnam revealed its inherent fragility, passive, rigid, and lacking the capacity to adapt to the rapid, lightning-style offensives of the liberation forces. Within this context, Hue, the ancient imperial capital steeped in millennia of cultural heritage, quickly emerged as a strategic hotspot of fateful significance. Hue was far more than a mere military objective. From a geo-military perspective, the city occupied a pivotal position within the defensive system of Military Region 1, guarding the north-south axis and controlling the vital transportation artery linking Hue with Da Nang. Politically and psychologically, Hue carried exceptional symbolic weight. The loss of the former imperial capital would signify a profound collapse in morale and legitimacy for the Saigon government. For this reason, following the 1973 Paris Peace Accords, Hue was designated by the Republic of Vietnam as a vital point that must not be lost. As military pressure steadily mounted, General Quang Trưởng, commander of I Corps, declared that he would die on the streets of Hue, expressing a resolve to defend the city to the last. Yet this oath reflected not only personal determination, but also the extreme strategic predicament and lack of viable options facing the Saigon side amid an irreversible shift in the course of the war. On the eve of the Thu Thien Hue liberation campaign, the balance of forces between the two sides presented a stark contrast. On one side stood the Republic of Vietnam's numerically large but passive and dispersed defensive system. On the other, a concentrated, proactive offensive force of the Liberation Army, characterized by a high level of operational resolve. By early March 1975, the Republic of Vietnam's defensive forces in Thu Thien Hue were estimated at approximately 56,000 troops. The Corps consisted of the 1st Infantry Division, considered the most combat-capable unit of the ARVN, along with Marine Brigades 147 and 258, Ranger Groups, local security forces, armored units, and artillery support. On this basis, General Quang Trưởng established a multi-layered defensive system, anchoring the northern perimeter along the My Chain and Bo Rivers, while concentrating defenses in the south around Phu Loc and National Highway 1A. This highway represented the sole land route connecting Hue with Da Nang, and also constituted the only viable lifeline for withdrawal should the defensive lines be breached. In contrast, the liberation forces entered the campaign with clear strategic initiative. The main striking force was the 2nd Corps under Major General Nguyen Huy An, comprising the 324th and 325th Infantry Divisions, the 203rd Tank Brigade, the 84th Artillery Regiment, and numerous supporting arms units. In addition, the armed forces of the Tri Thien Military Region, along with special forces, local artillery, and guerrilla units, were tasked with coordination, encirclement, and the severing of enemy withdrawal routes. While the ARVN posture was essentially defensive, aimed at holding out and buying time, the Liberation Forces' deployment reflected an aggressive offensive doctrine designed to annihilate the entire enemy defensive group in a short time frame, denying any opportunity for regrouping or escape. Throughout the Thu Thien Hue liberation campaign, the decision to cut National Highway 1A, the critical artery linking Hue and Da Nang, was regarded as a strategic turning point that would determine the outcome of the battle. This was not a simple tactical choice, but the result of a new operational mindset, striking directly at the enemy's capacity to survive as a defensive system, rather than merely inflicting incremental attrition. From the perspective of the Politburo and the Central Military Commission, particularly General Vuong Nguyen Giap, the moment was ripe to destroy the ARVN's main forces in Tri Thien before they could withdraw and consolidate in major urban centers. Hue and Da Nang were thus identified as interconnected objectives. Allowing ARVN forces to retreat safely to Da Nang would prolong the campaign in central Vietnam and impose higher costs on the liberation forces. Conversely, severing Route 1 would completely isolate Hue, turning its defensive grouping into a sealed military enclave, forced either to collapse or be destroyed in place. This decision marked a clear shift from cautious warfare toward the principle of speed, audacity, surprise. Instead of waiting for the enemy to retreat and then pursuing, the liberation forces moved to block the withdrawal routes directly, transforming the enemy's lifeline into a death trap. General Vong Wenjap issued a firm order to the Second Corps. National Highway 1A had to be cut in the shortest possible time, preventing any retreat toward Da Nang as a prerequisite for achieving a complete victory. In essence, the decision to sever Route 1 struck directly at the ARVN's most fatal vulnerability, its near-total dependence on a single transportation artery. Once this route was neutralized, the entire defensive system around Hue immediately lost its strategic relevance. From that moment, General Ngo Quang Trưởng static defensive posture was rapidly reversed, creating conditions for the liberation forces to launch decisive blows and triggering an irreversible chain collapse of the ARVN-1 Corps. With the decision to cut Route 1 established, the key challenge facing the Second Corps Command was how to implement this objective in the shortest possible time. Battlefield realities showed that breaching each enemy strongpoint along the western flank of Highway 1, particularly in the Bac Ma and Kim Suk areas, would consume considerable time and manpower. Meanwhile, every hour of delay allowed ARVN forces to consolidate, await reinforcements, or organize an orderly withdrawal. Under these circumstances, a bold operational plan was proposed, hauling heavy artillery to the summit of Lue Kai Mountain to fire directly onto Highway 1, sealing the enemy's vital escape route. Lue Kai Mountain is a high spur of the Bac Ma Range, nearly 900 meters in elevation, and located only about 3 kilometers from Highway 1. From this vantage point, artillery could dominate the narrow road section between the Kohai Lagoon and the surrounding mountains, while directly threatening key enemy positions at Kim Suk, Hill 363, and even the coastal inlets of Thuan An and Tu Hin. In terms of terrain and firepower, it was an ideal position. In terms of logistics and organization, however, hauling artillery up a slope approaching 40 degrees without mechanized access appeared nearly impossible. Yet it was precisely under such conditions that the People's War Doctrine and the creative tradition of the Vietnam People's Army were fully brought to bear. The decision to haul artillery up Lue Kai evoked direct memories of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, when artillery had been manhandled onto high ground, fundamentally altering the course of the campaign. Under the direct command of Major General Nguyen Hu An, thousands of engineers, artillerymen, youth volunteers, and civilian porters were mobilized to cut paths through the forest, dismantle each gun, and carry its components to the summit under conditions of absolute secrecy. Within just 2 days, a substantial concentration of firepower was successfully deployed atop Lue Kai. When the first guns were trained on Highway 1, the operational balance of the campaign truly shifted. From that point onward, the initiative no longer rested with the Hue defensive grouping, but passed entirely to the liberation forces. The hauling of artillery to Lue Kai thus represented not merely a creative tactical solution, but a decisive operational strategic blow that directly precipitated the rapid collapse of the entire Thua Thien Hue defensive system. Once the artillery positions on Lue Kai were completed and entered combat readiness, the Hue Liberation Campaign moved into an entirely new phase. On the morning of March 21, 1975, precisely as aimed at reopening an escape route ineffective. The air domain was quickly neutralized as anti-aircraft artillery controlled airfields and airspace around Hue, preventing effective air support or evacuation. Along the coast, where the Republic of Vietnam hoped for a final escape route, the liberation forces had deployed early and decisively. The inlets of Thuan An and Tu Hien were sealed by coastal artillery and naval commandos, forming a multi-layered interdiction net. As enemy units were driven onto the narrow coastal strip between sand dunes and lagoons, the encirclement was completed, turning the area into an inescapable trap. The greatest impact of this encirclement, however, lay not solely in military terms, but in the rapid disintegration of enemy morale and command cohesion. Inside Hue, the command system fell into severe disorder. News that Highway 1 had been cut, the sea routes sealed, and counterattacks repeatedly repelled shattered the remaining confidence of ARVN troops. Units lost coordination, soldiers fled spontaneously, often with their families and civilians, turning any notion of organized withdrawal into chaotic flight. Under such conditions, Hue became an island under blockade within a tightening ring. All reinforcement routes were cut, all escape avenues sealed, and every rescue option rendered futile. The complete encirclement not only ended the ARVN's defensive capacity in Thuotien Hue, but also directly set the stage for the final general assault, bringing the campaign toward its inevitable conclusion. The total collapse of Hue and the cascading disintegration of the entire ARVN Encore. Once the encirclement around Hue was fully established, the conflict ceased to be purely military and evolved into a comprehensive crisis of command and fighting will on the Republic of Vietnam's side. This phase of collapse did not result from a single annihilating blow, but from an internal disintegration unfolding simultaneously at tactical, operational, and psychological levels. At the command level, the I-Corps leadership system descended into severe disarray. Orders changed constantly, lacked coherence, and no longer reflected battlefield realities. While General Ngo Quang Trưởng sought to maintain the image of a commander determined to hold to the death, in practice, his ability to control subordinate units steadily eroded. Many units were cut off, lost communications, and were forced to fend for themselves amid shortages of supplies and fire support. A command apparatus designed for linear defensive warfare proved incapable of coping with a flexible, fragmenting encirclement. Command precipitated the erosion of fighting will. Once Highway 1 became a road of death, all illusions of orderly withdrawal or strategic counteroffensive evaporated. Soldiers no longer fought to hold territory or defend the city, but shifted into a mindset of personal survival. Desertion, abandonment of positions, and unit disintegration became increasingly common, not as acts of betrayal, but as natural human reactions to the disappearance of confidence in the command system. Psychologically, Hue became a suffocating space of waiting and uncertainty. Rumors spread faster than official orders. Fear enveloped both soldiers and civilians. In this environment, the authority of military orders was replaced by a sense of indeterminacy. No one knew how long to hold, which route to withdraw by, or whether rescue was still possible. Fighting spirit, which depends on belief in leadership and purpose, was eroded hour by hour. The collapse at Hue, therefore, cannot be reduced to the failure of a single individual or unit. It was the inevitable outcome of a command system that had lost its capacity to adapt, combined with a fighting will no longer sustained by a credible strategic vision. Once belief dissolved, military collapse became only a matter of time. When the collapse of command and will became irreversible, the outcome of the Hue campaign was merely a question of time. The final defensive lines of the Republic of Vietnam within the city disintegrated rapidly, not because they were fully destroyed, but because they no longer possessed the capacity for organized resistance. Hue fell amid chaos. Units withdrew without formation, orders went unenforced, and control of the battlefield gradually passed to the liberation forces. Militarily, the Hue campaign marked the complete collapse of military region Oin, once considered among the strongest and most elite regions of the Republic of Vietnam. The defensive system stretching from Quang Tri to Thu Thien was shattered in a short time, opening the gateway to Da Nang and the Central Coast. This victory went beyond the capture of a major city. It triggered a domino effect that rapidly unraveled Saigon's entire northern defensive posture. Politically and psychologically, the loss of Hue carried profound symbolic significance. The former imperial capital was not only a cultural and historical center, but also a symbol of continuity, authority, and order. Its fall delivered a severe blow to the morale of the Saigon government, shaking the confidence of both the military and the population in the regime's ability to survive. After Hue, the notion of holding central Vietnam became untenable, and strategic withdrawal gave way to a mentality of flight. In historical perspective, the Hue campaign was not an isolated battle, but a decisive link in the chain of events leading to the total collapse of the Republic of Vietnam in the spring of 1975. The fall of Hue closed one chapter of defense and opened an irreversible endgame of the war. The 1975 Hue campaign carried significance far beyond that of a military victory. It represented a structural turning point in the overall course of the Vietnam War. If Phuoc Long was a strategic test, and the Central Highlands a decisive break in the battlefield balance, then Hue was the point of irreversible confirmation of the collapse of the Republic of Vietnam's defensive system in central Vietnam. From the moment Hue fell, all efforts by Saigon to restore military equilibrium became impossible. Strategically, the Hue campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of an operational approach based on encirclement, division, and disintegration, rather than large-scale frontal annihilation. Control of key transportation axes, especially National Highway 1, enabled the liberation forces to strike at the enemy's most fundamental weakness, its capacity for mobility, supply, and centralized command. Once roads were cut and the battle space fragmented, the military strength of the Republic of Vietnam rapidly transformed into a burden rather than an asset. Historically, the fall of Hue carried deep symbolic meaning. The former imperial capital, cultural and spiritual heart of central Vietnam, was not merely a military site, but a repository of historical memory and symbolic authority. Its loss delivered a profound psychological shock, shattering the last vestiges of belief in the possibility of holding part of the country. After Hue, the war was no longer perceived as a prolonged stalemate, but as an ending already in motion. Taken as a whole, the Hue campaign functioned as a historical hinge. It connected the liberation forces' strategic counteroffensive phase with the comprehensive disintegration of the opposing side, directly paving the way for the decisive campaigns of the spring of 1975.